Check 1 2, check 1 2. Check 1 2, check 1 2. Check 1 2 1 2. Check 1 2 1 2. Check 1 2 1 2. Okay. In 1995, James W. Loewen wrote a textbook called Lies My Teacher Told Me, Everything Your American History Textbook Got Wrong. Chapter 5, a couple of pages just to set us up in conversation. But first, a couple of quotes. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, and if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Maya Angelou. The black-white rift stands at the center of American history. It is the great challenge to which our deepest aspirations to freedom must rise. If we forget that, if we forget the great stain of slavery that stands at the heart of our country, our history, our experiment, we forget who we are and we make the rift deeper and wider. Ken Burns. We have got to the place where we cannot use our experiences during and after the Civil War to uplift enlightenment of mankind. W.B. Du Bois. More Americans have learned the story of the South during the years of the Civil War and Reconstruction from Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind than from all of the learned volumes on the period. Warren Beck and Miles Clowers. Chapter 5, Gone with the Wind, The Invisibility of Racism in American History Textbooks. When was the country we now call the United States first settled? If we forget the lessons of the last chapter for a moment that Native Americans settled, then the best answer might be 1526. It is in the summer of that year 500 Spaniards and 100 black slaves found a town near the mouth of the Pee River in present-day South Carolina. Disease and disputes with nearby Indians caused many deaths in the early months of the settlement. In November, the slaves rebelled, killed some of their masters, and escaped to the Indians. By then, only 150 Spaniards survived. They retreated to Haiti. The ex-slaves remained behind and probably merged with the nearby native nations. This is cocktail party trivia, I suppose. American history textbooks cannot be faulted for not mentioning that the first non-native settlers in the United States were black. Educationally, however, the incident has its uses. It shows that Africans, is it too early to call them African Americans, rebelled against slavery from the first. It points to the important subject of a three-way race relations, Indian, African, European, which most textbooks completely omit. It teaches that slavery cannot readily survive without secure borders, and symbolically it illustrates that African Americans in the attendant subject of black-white race relations were part of American history from the first Europeans' attempt to settle. Perhaps the most pervasive theme in our history is the domination of black America by white America. Race is the sharpest and deepest division in American life. Issues of black-white relations propelled the Whig Party to collapse, prompted formation of the Republican Party, and caused Democratic Party to label themselves or itself the white man's party for almost a century. The first time Congress ever overrode a presidential veto was for the 1866 Civil Rights Act, passed by Republicans over the wishes of Andrew Jackson. Senators mounted the longest filibuster in U.S. history, more than 534 hours, to oppose the 1964 Civil Rights Bill. Thomas Bain Edsel has shown how race prompted sweeping political realignment of 1964 to 1972, in which white South went from Democratic bastion to Republican stronghold. Race still affects politics as evidenced by the notorious Willie Horton commercial used by George Bush in the 1988 presidential campaign and more recent candidacies of Ku Klux Klan leader David Duke. Race riots continue to shake urban centers from Miami to Los Angeles. Almost no genre of our public culture goes untouched by race, from the 1850s to the 1930s, except during the Civil War and Reconstruction. Minstrel shows, which derived in a perverse way from plantation slavery, were the dominant form of popular entertainment in America. During most of that period, Uncle Tom's Cabin was the longest running play, mounted in thousands of productions. America's top epic motion picture, Birth of a Nation, first talkie, The Jazz Singer, and the biggest blockbuster novel ever, Gone with the Wind, were substantially about race relations. The most popular radio talk show of all time was Amos and Andy, two white men posing as humorously incompetent African Americans. The most popular television miniseries ever was Roots, which changed our culture by setting off an explosion of interest in genealogy and ethnic background. In music, race relations provided the underlying thematic material for many of our spirituals, blues numbers, reggae songs, and rap pieces. The struggle over racial slavery may be the predominant theme in American history. Until the end of the 19th century, cotton, planted, cultivated, harvested, and ginned by slaves, was by far our most important export. Our graceful antebellum homes in the North as well as in the South were built largely by slaves or profits derived from the slave and cotton trades. Black-white relations became the central issues in the Civil War, which killed almost as many Americans as has died in all the combined wars since. Black-white relations was the principal focus of Reconstruction after the Civil War. America's failure to allow African Americans equal rights led eventually to struggle for civil rights a century later. The subject also pops up where least expected, at the Alamo, throughout the Seminole Wars, and even in the expulsion of Mormons from Missouri. Studs Terkel is right. Race is our American obsession. Since those first Africans and Spaniards landed on the Carolina shore in 1526, our society has repeatedly been torn apart and sometimes bound together by this issue of black-white relations.